Hello, everybody. I'm Alexis Brink. I'm a TAP and committee member for usataa. And I'm introducing and welcoming today Dr. Ellyn Bader. She's a psychologist and the founder of the Couples Institute and creator of the developmental model. She was also a president of the ITAA. She has co-authored the textbook In Quest for the Mythical Mate with her husband, as well as the book Tell Me No Lies. Dr. Bader runs an online training program that has trained therapists in 63 countries. And most importantly, she has transformed many couples' lives. Welcome, Dr. Bader.
Thank you, Alexis. Glad to be here.
Dr. Bader, what drew you to transactional analysis and how did you get started?
Excuse me. Yeah, I'm glad to answer that. And actually, I first learned about transactional analysis from John McNeil, and I know he was your last presenter. John and I were working in the same psychiatric hospital, and I was doing my master's thesis on how people run group therapy groups. And he was actually in training with Bob and Mary Goulding. And as I was looking and studying how people ran groups, and I really thought that John was the best of all the people in the psych place that I worked. So I asked him where he was getting trained, and he told me about the Gouldings. And then he took me to visit one of their training groups, and I was hooked and smitten and got into ongoing training with them very soon after that.
And what was the main concept that really grabbed you?
I think in those days, that's a long time ago now, I'm pretty old. So I think in those days was the concept of the powers in the patient and the ability of people to figure out really what they wanted to change about themselves and then take action to make those kinds of changes. And, that was very different than more of a psychoanalytic model that was very slower and insight oriented. And this was a more active approach.
Mm-hmm. And that honoring the change is really possible and we can make it happen. Yes.
Yeah. You
were one of the first people to start working with couples rather than each person of the couple separately. And I know you got probably some backlash on that, right, from the community. So if you can say a word about that. And also, why did you find working with the couple more effective than the individual?
So actually, I will say I came about this sort of two different ways. One is in my earliest days, and when I was working on my dissertation, it was a study of family therapy. And in those days, people did see whole families. And I could see so often that the couples were really the architect of the family, but nobody was pulling them aside and working with the couple on their issues and their dynamics. So I got really interested in what does it take to actually work with the couple and to specialize with couples. And also I had been trained, by Bob and Mary Goulding. They did a lot of weekend marathons, 2-day marathons. Mm-hmm. And so I started experimenting, and actually John and I did some of these together, and then Pete and I did some of them together, but running couples marathons. And when I saw how much change could happen in a relatively short period of time, mm-hmm. that got me interested in just even trying in my own practice to bring the couple together and to work with the couple. And when I was first teaching about it actually to professionals, I did get a lot of backlash. It's kind of staggering now to imagine, because that just isn't, couples therapy is well established, but it was viewed as such a low level stepchild to individual therapy. It just wasn't given the kind of credibility that it deserves or that it has today.
Yeah, amazing, because it is so popular today. What is the biggest hurdle for a couple to overcome when there is infidelity? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So when infidelity happens, trust is broken. It's, and I'm going to talk in generalities about the, a large majority of the kinds of couples who have infidelity. Lots of times that's in the context of a monogamous relationship, and where both people decided to get married, they decided to make a monogamous commitment, and then one person violates that unilaterally by deciding to have an affair and not telling the other person. And of course, there's lies, deception that goes along with that. And when that trust is violated, it shatters what somebody perceives as reality. It shatters the foundation. So rebuilding trust and the capacity for honesty is really, really crucial when you're working with infidelity.
Probably a lot of script work right there, then going back to those foundations. How do you use TA concept in training therapists for couple therapy?
So that's a good question, because I think two things. One is I think TA is just so much in my blood, and that I'm often using it without even realizing that I'm using it. But some of the concepts that I learned early on in my own training that I still teach a lot about are how you really set good goals or concrete goals, contracts for change. And it's always surprising to me when people come into my training program that they'll say, wow, I never thought about having an individual goal for each person in the room. They're much more like, they'll accept goals like, we want better communication, or we want to have a happier marriage, or things like that. But they're not actually breaking it down into what's required of each partner and what that person is actually going to be working on. And so the whole concept of contracts and goals is pretty important in my work. But there's other things, like definitely the concepts around symbiosis and how symbiosis is maintained, and what does it mean to disrupt symbiosis is a big part of my work. Because I trained with Bob and Mary, I do a lot of Gestalt two-chair redecision work in the work that I do. I also, there's a lot around contaminated ego states. So, it's woven into my work a lot.
Yeah, that sounds very, very interesting. I can't wait for your workshop.
Good.
Hey, can you briefly explain what the developmental model is? Just a little teaser. We don't want to give away everything.
All right. Well, and I'm not really going to be doing a lot on the model in the workshop, but
okay.
Pete and I developed a model that is one that looks at couples' relationships as having the potential to move through very specific developmental stages. And what happens instead for most couples, or many, many couples, is they get stuck. And they usually get stuck. This is not the only place, but a big place that couples get stuck is in symbiotic relationships, which is the first stage and is a valuable stage, actually. But then they keep trying to maintain that sense of too much togetherness, unconditional love, and they end up in very conflict avoidant or very hostile fighting relationships that are really just trying so hard.
So it sounds like people get more independent through the therapy.
Well, we focus a lot on what's called differentiation as well as independence, and those concepts are often confused, but differentiation is what helps people move out of symbiosis, and without it, they continue to, fight, be competitive, get into, parent-child dynamics and all of the things that TA folks know really well about what symbiosis looks like.
Yeah, excellent. So what are two of the main gifts that participants in your workshop will walk away with?
Well, I hope they'll, first of all, really like seeing some of the clinical work, because I'm going to show some video of some clinical work. But I'm going to be talking a lot about the kinds of work, since this is about infidelity, I'm going to be talking about the kinds of things that go on in stage 1, 2, and 3 of infidelity work, because it's different. And the focus is really different. And I think when therapists are much clearer about where to focus in each of those stages, they really develop better treatment plans with people. And so I think people are going to come away with that. Another thing that I don't hear talked about too often, but I do talk a lot about, is what's the role of obsessing after infidelity? Mm-hmm. And some ideas about how to work with that traumatic obsession that goes on often for people after infidelity.
Yeah, very, very interesting. I mean, so many people are dealing with it. So wonderful, wonderful subject. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Ellyn Bader. And I hope that we see many of you come to the workshop on May 7, which is Managing the Crisis of Infidelity. And it's May 7 from 12 till 2 Eastern time. And I'm certainly really looking forward to being there with you. And thank you so much.
You're welcome. I'll see you then.
See you then.